Check, check. Check, check. Check, one, two. Yep. Okay. Got lights. Check, check. Check, check. Check, one, two. Check, check. Check, check. Nope, I'm not. Check, check. Check, one, two. Check, check. Check, one, two. Check, check. Check, one, two. Check, check. Check, three, four. Check, check. Yep. Good shape. vicini. So, de nada.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. So great to see you this afternoon. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Chris Lewis, and I have the distinct honor of serving as the John S. Banke Director of the Henry. Thank you all for being here, as well as for all of you watching online today. My warmest welcome to Hank Willis Thomas, who is here from New York with his wife, Rujeko Hockley, who is a very talented curator at the Whitney Museum. His mother, Deborah Willis, who is also a very talented photographer and photography scholar. His father, Hank, his two precious girls, and his studio mates, Christina Caputo and Max Teicher, who have been wonderful to work with. I'd also like to give a shout out to Jordan Schnitzer's team as well. Thank you for being here. And my predecessor, Sylvia Wolf, is here, and I just want to give a shout out to her as well. Thanks for being here, Sylvia. It's great to see you. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we at the Henry Art Gallery live and work on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples and the shared waters of all tribes and bands, named and unnamed, including Suquamish, Duwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The land acknowledgement reminds us of our connections, indebtedness, and responsibilities to the peoples and the more than human kin where we live and work. We invite you to join us in paying respects to elders past, present, and future, and to consider what paying those respects means within the work that we do as individuals and within institutional frameworks. Last night, we had the most incredible opening exhibition party to celebrate the remarkable talent of Hank Willis Thomas and his exhibition Love Overrules, graciously loaned from the collections of Jordan D. Schnitzer and his family foundation. And this afternoon, we have the absolute pleasure of hosting Hank and Director of Curatorial Affairs, Shamim M. Momin, in conversation to learn more about this extraordinary and powerful exhibition. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Hank and to Jordan and to Shamim, whose dedication and vision have brought this outstanding show to fruition. Lead sponsorship for the show is provided by the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation, For Culture, and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, with media sponsorship by the Seattle Times. It is my distinct pleasure to formally introduce Shamim and Hank. Since 2018, Shamim M. Momin has been the Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Henry. She has organized numerous exhibitions, including the museum-wide group exhibition In Plain Sight, as well as major commissions by Kelly Akashi, which is currently on view downstairs. I encourage you to see it if you have not yet. Gary Simmons, Donna Huanca, Diana Al-Hadid, and many others. Before coming to the Henry, Shamim co-founded LAND, the Los Angeles Nomadic Division, a public art organization committed to curating site and situation-specific contemporary art projects. Shamim also served for more than 10 years at the Whitney Museum of American Art, notably co-curating the 2004 and 2008 Whitney Biennials. And if I may do a little humble brag, speaking of the Whitney Biennial, the Henry has featured exhibitions of 4 artists that are included in this year's biennial. Those are Demian Dinayazi, Hector Garcia, Rose B. Simpson, and P. Staff. So I must say, the Henry has its finger on the pulse of identifying extraordinary talent and holds true to its mission to amplifying diverse voices. Hank Willis Thomas is an internationally renowned artist that lives and works in New York. His work has been exhibited all over the world and is collected by very prestigious institutions such as the Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the High Museum, the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., and many others. He is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Gordon Parks Foundation Fellowship, the Guggenheim Fellowship, Soros Equality Fellowship, Aperture West Book Prize, the Renew Media Arts Fellowship from the Rockefeller Foundation, and many others. I want to mention that he earned his BFA from New York University and his MA and MFA from the California College of Arts in San Francisco. He has also received honorary doctorates from the Maryland Institute of Art and the Institute for Doctoral Studies in the Visual Arts in Portland, Maine. Hank's public practice includes permanent artworks around the country, including most recently the Embrace on the Boston Common, which is a gorgeous statue that pays tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. Reach, made in collaboration with Kobe Kennedy at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, and Duality at the Underline in Miami. Hank is also currently working on a project in Seattle at Judkins Park Station. And please be sure not to miss Hank's piece, Love Overrules. It's a neon piece that is on the exterior of the Henry. Before Hank and Shamim start, I would like to welcome Jordan Schnitzer. Jordan is one of the most passionate art collectors I have ever met and has one of the most significant art collections in the country and in the world. I have had the pleasure of visiting his collection in Portland, where he has amassed over 22,000 paintings, sculptures, works on papers, and other objects, roughly by 1,500 artists. And of those artists, he is an important collector and steward of Hank Willis Thomas's work with over 160 pieces. This exhibition at the Henry would not be possible without Jordan. I would also like to mention that for 25 years, Jordan, the great philanthropist that he is, at his own expense, has loaned collections to museums across the country. This and his prolific collecting are a true testament to his dedication to supporting artists and sharing their work with the world. And for that, we are immensely grateful. Thank you, Jordan. Please come up and say hello.
I'll be exceedingly brief because the real stars are coming up in a second. I grew up in Portland. My mother had a contemporary Northwest art gallery with Portland, Seattle artists. My first love is art of our region, but I started collecting prints and multiples and now paintings and sculptures of the biggest of the post-World War II artists. Why that time frame? Because those artists speak of issues of our time. And there's probably no one better today with the themes that you've already seen, or if you haven't gone through the galleries yet, than Hank Willis Thomas, of helping us look at historical issues, current issues. And I've always said that artists are journalists. They're chroniclers of our time. You go back in history, and what you see in these walls is exactly that. We were just lucky walking through again, and he was talking about some of the work, and I'm sure Shamim will ask him about some of the works that maybe come on the screen, but you're in for a treat. Why is this important? Because at a time when this country is having all the issues it's had, no different than times past, we need people like this with their voice that helps present issues for us to think about our values, how we think about ourselves, others, and how we treat each other. And those are issues that are as relevant and more so today than maybe 10, 20, 50, 100 years ago. So with that, I appreciate everything the museum did here of getting the work out of the warehouse and on the walls where it can do what he intended it to do, and that is stop you in your tracks, be puzzled, smile, frown, but most of all, think. What you think is unique to you, but maybe you'll hear a few secrets from him about part of what he was thinking when he did the work. So thank you for being here. And the last plea is the team here has done a spectacular job. I go to more museums than most people in the country. We've had 180 exhibitions, 120 museums, and your team here, you should be so proud of them. The way the work was arranged was brilliant. This show could be at the Tate, MoMA, LACMA, anywhere in the world. The work's that good, and the way it was presented here is that good also. So thank you to Chris, Shamim, the whole preparatory staff for really honoring the artist and honoring the work. Thank you.
Speak into them. Is yours on?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me?
Can everyone hear? This is good. Okay, great. I'm going to try hard not to flash you while I'm sitting here.
Yeah. Is this on?
Is yours on? Hello. Okay, there we go. So welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have some time to speak with Hank about the works, or some of the works at least, that you've seen, I hope, in the exhibition already. If you haven't, I encourage you to spend some time after the talk. Hopefully there'll be some information that you can bring with you. And as noted, of course, your own perspective and your own thoughts. What you see in the galleries is about 90 works that span about 20 years of Hank's work. It's not strictly a survey by any means, but it is intended to cover the breadth of his thinking and his processes, his different types of media, and you'll see certain thematics and certain ways of unpacking images consistent throughout that time frame, and hopefully in some of the ways in which they're presented, to be able to make some of those connections across time and space yourselves as well. Noting the titles and the dates, I think, is really key, so I just would encourage you to do that. Normally, I don't really spend a lot of time with labels myself, but I think the relevance of when some of the images are pulled from and why they speak differently within the way that Hank has treated them or adjusted them is quite key as well. And we'll see that as we walk through the show a little bit here today. So if we, I have the slides, let's see. Am I gonna do this right? Yes, okay. Oh, should we spread apart a bit? We're a bit in the shadow. Sorry. I don't want, is that kind of weird? Don't go so far. No, stay there. Over here? Okay, all right, we'll do that this way. So I wanted to just start with one of the earlier series that I think has had such a resonance and impact across so many of the other projects that followed it, which is the branded series. We have one example of the series in the show, but it's a very powerful one, and like I said, I think quite significant. So I was hoping you could just talk about how this came about to begin with, and how you began sourcing the images and things like that, a bit about your process.
Well, this is an image I took, I think, in 2001 or 2. And then I digitally manipulated it to add the swoosh a few years later. I was thinking about how, I was thinking about the term branding, you know, we take for granted kind of the other meanings of the term. And I was thinking about how slaves were branded as a sign of ownership, the same way we brand cattle or brand horses, and I was thinking about also scarification and the way in which mark making on the body can be a symbol of beautification and of unity or signifying culture, and wanted to kind of challenge myself and viewers to kind of confront what the branding of our society and of our bodies in the 21st century might mean or might look like from an anthropological perspective.
Would you say that the prevalence of logos or how we wear them to cite certain ideas about ourselves or to align ourselves with certain groups or communities is similar, or you're making that parallel to some degree with the...
I think you and I are probably part of the first generation that grew up with like logos being central to our identities. I don't know, is that true, Mom? But I believe like not long before we were born, kids grew up and they maybe had a thing, a toy or whatever. Maybe they wore certain sneakers, but when we grew up, the actual mark actually meant something and had a currency and it said something about us and what our values were, who if we were valuable. And I think by the time I was a young adult, it kind of gotten to the next stage of maturation, and I started to think about a lot of our phones and our cars and the ways in which we kind of brand ourselves to others through our association with these products. And both, I guess, yeah, who owns us and when we actually are doing the advertising for a corporation with our own body integrity and with really as a lens, but also the coiffing of the hair.
Idea back to you is pretty extraordinary to me. So those
Yeah.
levels of interpretation.
Saw that. You see a black mother and daughter at the front of the bus looking at a white mother and daughter in the front of the bus, which we know that the Montgomery bus boycotts were about where people got to sit on a bus. So it's Greyhound signaling that they are open to integration, that people can be look across the aisle, so to speak, to connect. And so there's that to me is really fascinating as a sign. Greyhound is a bus company. I know a lot of people probably never been on a bus before. Yeah, but it was like a big company. It was like Dell. But it's also fascinating. That's why I like taking these ads. They were meant to be discarded. They're ephemera of a moment in time, but they're also a window into the past. And when you call something art, it allows us to look more deeply at things that we are already familiar with and think differently about kind of the context in which they were made. The image on the right is an image by, and it's kind of a meta. It's an image by a person named Todd Gray, who's an artist and photographer, who was a friend of my mom, and he's the first photographer I ever assisted when I was in high school. I didn't know when I appropriated the image and that I was using his image. It was only like last year or something. He's like, "Oh yeah, I took that picture." But it's kind of fascinating because sometimes with these images, because it's not just the photographer, it's the art director, the creative director, the copywriter, the agency. There are so many hands and people involved in making any image that we see on that level, that we forget that they're also kind of the authorship is like multifaceted. And I wanted to kind of look at this image. This is an image for a poster for a movie called Jungle Fever in 1991, and it was a movie that was talking about the taboo subject of interracial dating at the time. And again, it's an image that might not be nearly as controversial today as it was 30 years ago when it came out. And so but maybe in some places it still is. But but I'm also watching kind of time change with the work and how I think it's still very much relevant, but in some ways the mystery is more kind of potent now.
You said something in one of the tours that I found really interesting about visual culture being kind of how we speak to the future, because it is such a prevalent element of our experience and one that is easy to see after the fact, and that holds for many of the eras before us as well. And so to think about how to, in a way, help our future selves understand ourselves now through this work is something that I find as an the projection into the future, the time-traveling archive is very interesting to me. But we will go on to the next slide. I suspect that, per usual, we're spending a lot of time on the early ones, but I wanted to jump to this piece to talk a little bit about, again, not just the source stories, but the choices of format and process, but also how the use of archival photography, again, in a different way here. So this one is called Trouble the Waters. And
so since my mom is here, I had to ask, is this Addison Scurlock image? It's from a Daddy Grace, Robert McNeil, okay. So this is a DC photographer whose the images were in the Smithsonian archive. And so a lot of times I will have like looked through archives, and these images are part of my kind of growing up, upbringing. But this is of a baptism in actually in a pool in Washington, D.C. But there's kind of a lot for me in this story of baptism, which is about, I think, transformation, about kind of going through this process that is leading us to liberation. And that connects to the pattern here, which is bow tie, and it's a pattern that was used, legend has it, during the Underground Railroad to send signals to escaping slaves that were on quilts that were hung outside of safe houses. And the message would have been to kind of disguise yourself as a free person, dress up, so that no one kind of thinks of you as a slave. And so I think a lot of my work is about kind of different stories or different pathways and the struggle to find clear pathways to emancipation. And so this work is talking about that.
I also like the notion of the coded symbol, which I think that resonates through a lot of your other work, is the way something may look like one thing but speak in a different voice depending on your perspective or you as the audience. And that sort of general concept of shifted perspectives, either by how you experience the work or just by the fact of calling attention to the fact that every audience or every individual will come from a specific angle, literally as well as figuratively, to the work and to the ideas. And the codes read differently depending on what information you have or what is part of your experience. So, all right. Damn it. I'm just gonna hold it here. I wanted to talk to address these works that are created on a kind of mirror process and talk a little bit about that. I was interested to hear how you made them, for one, but then also why that material kind of resonated with the image or the experience of the work.
So invention is a part of my work, and I'm always thinking about new ways to present old things. So the image, as you see, as I mentioned, the image from the 50s, that I'm creating these sculptures using flag frames for the previous work. This is another work that is also required invention as a way to kind of present it. And so I think a lot about, I grew up looking at these black and white pictures of old people doing old people stuff. And I could never really, I felt like history was always out of reach and wanted to imagine kind of what it would be like to be there. And so this is maybe even a kind of very obvious attempt to do that. So this is during the civil rights movement, one of the ways in which people protested the system, the workings of the system, was to go limp in their sit-ins and in their protests. The idea that the limp human body is kind of the hardest thing to move. And so the people who were enforcing various forms of oppression or the status quo are now, they can't go about their business in the same way because they now have to deal with this body that is not kind of going along. But also people chose to
directly
but also people chose to wear their Sunday's best, to look dignified in their protest for equal rights and to be included in the society. And so this is an image of a woman being hauled into a police van. And I wanted to also so if you see it in the gallery, you'll see that there's a handmade mirror that kind of has all of the signs of the spilling of the silver, which, because I grew up going to making art in the darkroom and on making silver gelatin prints, and the silver halides had a really kind of important role in the making of images. I wanted to use actual silver in the silvering process as mirroring to kind of reference that.
I also like the way that it feels somewhat eroded and kind of unstable, as well as a surface material. So I feel like that enhances the image and what is happening within this protest, or this sort of dignified protest, as you put it, in the source. From there, I have a series of the works that employ text here. So there's a couple of slides using that and how they do it in different ways. I wanted to talk a little bit about this series. I believe there are 20 or 40? Okay, 20 in the series overall. We have 4 upstairs in a kind of immersive gallery, so you can kind of stand within them. But to talk about this historical source and what your choices were to transform that language and why.
So one of the images that I grew up looking at was Ernest Withers' photograph of Memphis sanitation workers who were protesting the segregation in their workplace in 1968. That their protest became infamous in some ways because it was in support of that protest that Dr. Martin Luther King went down to Memphis and was ultimately assassinated. Mm-hmm. But when I look at the image of all these people, these men holding signs saying, "I am a man," which is what the original protest sign said, I kind of found it astounding when I was an adult to think that just before I was born, it was necessary for people to affirm their humanity in such a way. I didn't realize that soon after, people would need to do that away again by stating things like Black Lives Matter,
Right.
and that being a similar controversial statement by just stating kind of what would be obvious to others. But so the history does sometimes give us an opportunity to redo. And so this work, I was thinking about that in 2009. How do I remix, or how would I reconsider those protests, and how would different people do it? At the time that the United States Constitution was written, African Americans were counted as 3/5 of a human being. And so I imagine someone outside of the Federal Hall then with that sign, I am 3/5 of a man. And each of them has people volunteering for the Vietnam War or World War II, or being challenged to kind of put on a certain kind of identity of what is, manhood has its own loaded kind of message. And so I'm really attempting to kind of deconstruct these simple phrases in various ways. So for reinterpretation of my own identity, but also looking back at history in various ways.
I had a question from one of our wonderful Hal's, our Henry Art liaisons, the other day about the.
Hi, Hals.
I hope somewhere here. About the phrasing "I am man," and thinking about that in terms of masculinity, which you just noted for a moment there, and how that the conception of masculinity in general, or Black masculinity in particular, resonates in your work. And I'm curious. She was suggesting its relationship to the branded piece. And I was curious if you had any thoughts on that.
I'm open to various interpretations. Let's think about, up until really the past 30, 40 years, man was humanity, right? So the term I am man meant I am everyone. And so that's also something that is interesting to consider, is how the lexicon changes, and therefore the meaning of simple phrases can change dramatically in a short period of time.
That's good, right. Okay. Which brings us to another somewhat text-based piece, but I would think of it as almost like combining some of the series that we were looking at previously in not just intent, but in its approach. So these were, I imagine, I'm looking at your faces to see, some of you might have been around when this campaign was very common, very prevalent in magazines, advertisements for Absolute Vodka. Not this specifically, obviously, but the reference is to that ad campaign. Does everyone remember that? Okay, good. And there was always the recognizable silhouette of the Absolute bottle, usually placed in exotic or whimsical spaces, and very lifestyles that indicated a kind of sophistication, wealth, very, one might say, upper class white folk lifestyle is the way that I would read it, and especially with the kind of players that were in the ads themselves. Obviously, Hank is doing something different here and using different kinds of images to appropriate that approach with the bottle and its meaning. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about Absolute No Return, which I find incredibly captivating, and it's even as is, but I love the source as well, to talk about what it means.
Sure. The Absolute Vodka campaign of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was probably one of the most successful print advertising campaigns ever. And the way that they could kind of make their brand ubiquitous while also instilling certain values and cachet was pretty laudable. And I thought that I should try to use the language of advertising to talk about things that I think are also important that the company might not be able to do, or might choose not to do. And if they did, likely wouldn't be able to do it responsibly. And I thought that by using the language of advertising to talk about things that advertising couldn't responsibly talk about, I could actually send signals or catch, because we are, by the time you're probably 3 or 4 in this society, years old, as my daughter is, you're media literate, and that there's a language that's subconsciously working in your head for how to interpret things, and you don't have to understand what is actually it's an ad for to be able to get the story behind it. And so that kind of, I think about logos and advertising as a kind of hieroglyphs of our time, that is a language that we don't even acknowledge that we all speak, and that I can see an ad from a different part of the world and still kind of get to the essence of it. And so with these works, Absolute Reality and Absolute No Return, I'm thinking about violence in our societies, and I'm also thinking about this transatlantic slave trade. The door of no return on the left is a symbol of the slave trade. It's on Gorée Island in Senegal, where millions of people walked through this door as captives and never to return to their homeland. And so I wanted to kind of use the potency of this campaign to talk about that. But also, there's alcoholism is also a story related to that embedded in this work as well.
I can't believe it's already 3 o'clock, so I have quite a number of additional images, but perhaps we could talk briefly about this series, and I learned more about it as well in terms of it coming from a kind of collective endeavor.
Yeah, so these are all part of the branded series.
Yeah.
And the first image, the story that the scar chest, I mentioned that, like, I took the picture at one point, and then later the scarification was added because I was not as good at Photoshop as my then roommate. And I remember, like, I was trying to do this, and he was like, "You suck." He was like, "You can't." I was like, "Oh yeah." I'm like, "If you could do it better, just do it." He's like, "Fine, I'll just do it." And then he would just do it. His name is Ryan Alexiev. Collaborated with him on a lot of things, and so that became like this. I became, in some ways, like a creative director, where, like, I had the idea, and I didn't have the technical skills to like do what he could do. And so this is another work, these works where I made the design, and Ryan just made them look way better. But I was thinking again about the way that brands kind of infiltrate our identity. You know, the American Express, the MasterCard, the Discover card. What are the meanings of it? What does it mean when I say I have a MasterCard? Who is the master? Am I the master of whom, or is the company that I owe the money to the master? And some of these companies, like JP Morgan Chase, do actually have a connection to the transatlantic slave trade. But also with the American Express, what would the 16th century or 17th century American Express look like? Would it have been a slave ship? Would that have been the commodity that's being traded that would allow people to have access similarly, I think future generations might look at us and think about things that we took for granted that were normal, and recognize our complicity in dehumanizing events. And so, not to mention the devices that are in all of our pockets that are a result of child labor and the pillaging of natural resources in the Congo, and other places. So I'm also seeing myself as not detached from the problematic systems that I'm critiquing, and that is also something I'm always attempting to address.
And I think you made an interesting point the other day as well about the idea of currency, or how we engage with systems of currency as their own kind of control or bondage of our ability to do things, and to be that we very freely and willingly engage and put ourselves as a part of, owing money, credit cards being one of the greatest symbols of that kind of power over, or necessity of debt and things like that. So it functions on so many different levels of different kinds of systems as well. I'm going to, come on now. There we go. I'm actually going to skip this one and talk a little bit about and move to these lenticulars, which you'll see in multiple galleries, different galleries throughout the show. But I had these two together because I wanted to talk a little bit as well about how the mutability of language and, again, this notion of where your perspective lands changes the way that you read it or understand a statement. Signage in general and advertising in general is ostensibly intended to clarify what you need to know, and especially directional signage, wayfinding signage, protest signage, that kind of thing, to tell you something simply and clearly. But of course, as we know, it's not often presented in that way, or it has many, many other ways of speaking as well. And so I feel like these text-based lenticulars really capture that notion. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how you came to them.
Well, all of my work is about framing and context, and about how, depending on where you're standing, your truth may be different. And I encourage myself and viewers to both acknowledge the truth of their perspective. You okay?
Yeah.
Water?
I'm going to understand.
Well, I'll do the talking.
You talk.
Acknowledge the truth of their perspective, but also be conscious of the fact that there are other perspectives, that different people's positioning, whether it be their socioeconomic or gender or ethnic or historical or age or geographical perspective, will influence their truth in a different way. Mm-hmm. And that was very much on display on January 7th, 2021. So this work from 2021 is really thinking about, so January 6th, 2021, there was a party at the U.S. Capitol. Has anybody heard about that? A bunch of peaceful people were touring. Some confused the the Speaker of the House's desk as a toilet. But, you know, that is the truth for tens of millions of people. And others have a very different truth. And there was this statement, seeing is believing, that many of us kind of heard and thought was true. But actually, the truth, which many photographers have always known, is that seeing is deceiving. That what you see is always framed, and whoever's framing it is actually coloring or creating your truth, your reality. And so these works, which move from saying believing is seeing is deceiving, seeing is seeing, or seeing, are really kind of a meditation on the kind of the complex ways in which I relate to looking in this world. And so this other work here, I was asked by the New York Times in 2020 what I lost during the pandemic, and I said everything and nothing, because I did lose everything that I thought was me. But then I also learned how useless a lot of that was. And so I wanted to make a work that kind of talked about the elusiveness of everything.
This brings me to a series that you'll see installed in the back gallery, the farthest gallery in the back. It's quite immersively installed, from Unbranded, A Century of White Women. And we have 2 slides of 4 of these images, just to give you some sense of the range, because that's quite important in the presentation, how you experience it to see it. As the title suggests, there is an image taken from each year from 1915 to 2015. So I guess that's 101. In fact, images, we have about 52 of them in the gallery, so they isn't fully complete, but it does give you a sense of how the images have shifted, the conception of value of woman or womanness in the world, and how that is marketed, how that is shown to a larger audience, and that the femaleness is often the product itself that is being marketed to you. and different estimations of what that is, that kind of value system at different times. And so tracking it, it's hung essentially chronologically, and I recommend that you walk along that way so you get a feel for how those cycles have shifted and changed throughout. But I picked a selection to talk about either specifically or in how they reference certain historical periods that you've spoken about. I was hoping you could address. And I'll show you quickly the other group if you'd like to start with one or the other. Let's start with this one.
They all make me uncomfortable.
I know, yeah.
I know that to believe in race, one has to suspend their disbelief. That I think race is no more real than Batman. But the story of it has become so ingrained in most Americans' identities that we can't really see beyond the myth that race was created. I think race is one of the most successful advertising campaigns of all time. That in order to steal people, kidnap people from their home, and to turn them into a product, they needed to be dehumanized. And part of the powerful branding of the Western powers that participate in this transatlantic slave trade is that this mythology of race that was used to turn people into products is something that we still very much navigate. And we often talk about the oppression of the minority, but we don't recognize that the actual oppression is often on the majority that has done the dehumanizing. And I went to Ireland, I think in 2009, and it was fascinating to see the person who was driving us was like, oh, that's the big house. That was the plantation. And like talking about kind of their history in a way that was not different than the way I heard people talk about the history of being disenfranchised in the southern United States, and realized that a lot of the things that England did in the United States and other parts of the world were perfected on people in Scotland and Ireland and India, and that and so I was really kind of curious about like, okay, what is whiteness? Like where did it begin, and how did it become dominant in the way that it is, at least in our society? And I was thinking about, I was looking at these old I guess signs in the West that said like no Negroes, no Spanish, no Jews, and it led me to think about how 100 years ago most people who would be considered white now would not be considered white. So that would be anyone who was considered Spanish, anyone who was considered Jewish or Italian or Irish or Russian, or a lot of people who we would just presume are white now would not have been white, and that a lot of them came here as refugees, asylum seekers, or people looking for a better life because the life that they were living where they came was less than desirable, and that they were able to assimilate through the changing of their name or the changing of their accent or the moving out of their kind of ethnic community, and by reading the language of our culture to become part of it. And there were a lot of African Americans who also did that, who passed for white so that they can be given or treated like a human being. And so I wanted to kind of track whiteness and also white femininity, which is seen as something that's worth something so precious in the lore of our society over the course of these 100 years. In 1915, women in most of the United States did not have the right to vote. And that was also a very contentious issue. And so I wanted to kind of track that from that period up to 2015. And that was a time when a woman got the popular vote for the presidential election, and so a white woman who kind of came online as a consumer during one of these years did that, and so that's what this is. And so on the left is looking at, I guess they're drinking orange juice or pineapple juice, and it feels like you're on a Polynesian island, which is great to be white. And each of them kind of has a different kind of story. But that's for concentrated juice, which is also, so it's like, I think it was for Dole.
Yeah. Yeah, the allure of the exotic still pervades, I guess. We were playing the game of can you guess what the ad was for yesterday in one of the tours, and I think perhaps the one I found most interesting was in terms of its sources was the ice skater. Would anyone like to guess?
Oh, where's my phone? Can I get my phone? I want to see if I can do this. Anyone else want to guess? You have decent eyes?
No.
Dang. It's actually an ad for, I'm not going to be able to do this, not going to be able to find this that fast, but I'm going to pretend just because the language for this was so profound. So keep talking. Talk amongst you.
So shall I give it away?
I wouldn't.
No,
Sure.
not yet.
Sure. I mean, it's just, it's more about watching you try to interpret this is what I'm most excited about.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I've already heard the backstory, so
Yes.
hopefully I would get that right. But in any case, it's an ad for pantyhose, essentially. And the notion was, are you looking for the exact language?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, this is the original, this is it.
Oh,
Can
you
I
got it?
download it?
Okay. I could read it.
And there are some, I think, that are available that people can see.
They'll be posted on the website. There'll be a selection posted
Okay,
of the
just-
original ads on the website come this week.
Try to just read this copy.
Okay. This is fairly
It's
extensive.
long.
During the war, the Springs Cotton Mills was called upon to develop a special fabric for camouflage. It was used in the Pacific to conceal ammunition dumps and gun emplacements, but the Japanese learned to detect it by its lack of jungle smells. To overcome this, when the fabric was dyed, it was also impregnated with a permanent odor of hibiscus, hydrangea, and old rubber boots. The deception was so successful that when Tokyo fell, the victorious invaders hung a piece of this fabric on a Japanese flagpole. This process has been patented, and the fabric is now available to the false bottom and bust bucket business as spring-made perker, made of combed yarns, et cetera, the white with gardenia, and imbued with these scents, the white with gardenia, the pink with camellia, the blush with jasmine, and the nude dusty. If you want to I'm sorry, I can't help but read it that way. It's too hilarious. If you want to achieve that careless look and avoid skater's steam, kill two birds with one stone by getting a camouflage Calipigian camisole with the spring-made label on the bottom of your trademark, which is quite genius in and of itself. I also love the fellow in the background who is, suggesting that smell of roses as he looks on, somewhat alarmed, but certainly titillated as well by this ice skater who is so freely exposing but not exposing herself.
And so just try to imagine having kind of been a person who maybe worked as a riveter or did a job during World War II, and now you're back at home, like doing, a woman's work, and there is this appeal that, like, the war effort of maybe the uniforms that you were making, that there is this technology that was hiding kind of nefarious things in bushes, that during the war can now be applied to
Hiding nefarious bushes?
yes. So that you can avoid, and I like to avoid skater steam,
Yeah.
which I'm sure everyone here has been afraid of. And so there's like these as this woman lifts her leg, these men are sitting on the bench like smelling roses, and she's careless. And there's so many scary things that, like, there is a jujitsu that goes on and getting us to buy into these products. They've just become more and more savvy. That was a lot of text.
A lot of exposition for that product.
But and so we take for granted when we see advertisement now, it's even more kind of insidious because there's product placements, there are influencers, and people just happen to have this thing, be living this fantastic life, but we don't see all of the manipulation that goes on behind the scenes to make people whose lives probably suck look incredible, because most people's lives suck. So, that's why when I'm on social media, I'm like, wow, this person's just having a great time every moment of their life. Yeah. And that's basically what these things were doing also. And I think but the alienation and the fear of, like, okay, you want to have artificial natural odors because you don't want to be seen as distasteful,
and or an actual human.
Yeah.
As well, I think as you walk through the gallery, it's more prevalent, the reoccurrence of a kind of like military imagery or source happens a lot throughout the ads, whether and aspects of like results of that, whether it's imprisonment, caging, a certain kind of violence, and all of that runs parallel to the depiction of women in those situations throughout the ads as well. So
I'm going to show you one more,
Okay.
because I don't really often get this. Because what's also fascinating is that when you look at them, if they were just the ads, people wouldn't necessarily think twice or to look at them more. Oh, of course, I closed that. Look at them as closely. But there is, to me, something kind of really powerful in taking a look at the images and the stories that our society kind of makes normal. Which one? The copper tone one? That was... Oh.
that one's up there.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about this one.
Oh, yeah. So this is in reference to the one on the far right. And the text says, the large copy says, "The game is broomsticks." That's the catchphrase logo. Let's see if I can read this. Shoot.
Do I need to do it?
No, I got it. I just need to make it bigger. Yours expand.
Uh-oh.
This is probably the image that makes me the most uncomfortable, I must say, with or without its copy.
Oh.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. So the smaller text copy says, "Ring around Rosie, or Carol, or Eleanor, etc. Fun." These are all with periods at the end, by the way, declarative sentences.
So start over, yeah.
"Ring around Rosie, period, or Carol, or Eleanor, etc. Fun. But you can only play if you wear broomsticks slacks, hopsacks, twists, twills, flannels and blends of acrylic and rayon for permanently pressed good looks, play styles, game colors, to help make you a winner. But if you don't want to play our way, take off our pants and go home." So that is really even more disturbing than I recall the first time I read it.
But again, this is normal. Like, this is, I mean, it's chilling to think about kind of, what I think is so fascinating is that most of us, or almost everyone in this room, when I say came online, like, we got indoctrinated, that we were 3 or 4 or 5 years old when we started to see images like these, and that kind of also might shape our politics. Like, what was okay in 1970 is not at all okay today. And we are arguing about different things when we have political discourse, because our understanding of what is, when we talk about woke, a lot of people who were making that, they were in college. Like, Donald Trump was in college when he saw this ad. And I'm pretty sure he saw this ad. And that dictates kind of what is seen as socially acceptable for different people. And so I'm really consciously trying to create empathy for myself and others, but also be aware of the brutal ways in which we indoctrinate people into being seen as worthy. Like if you don't, what's it say? If you don't.
If you don't want to play our way or something, take off our pants and go home. And I presume they're referring to the woman who has no pants on, so she's not playing their way, which has a whole other set of issues. In any case, we are coming close onto our time.
On a lighter note.
But I do.
Okay, let's skip this one. What else we
and
got?
this is just some more that you can see, and then there's, of course, interesting stories for each one. But I thought we could end here.
Oh, great.
This is a piece called Justice, Red. And I would love for you, I mean, we could either talk about it, but I much prefer when you do. So I'm going to let you describe it.
Well, I was in Savannah. I was actually once in New York. There was a flea market, and I found like this bucket of old American flags, or basket, I should say. And then I was in Savannah, Georgia, and there were all of these old American flags, and I was kind of curious about like, what is the value of an old American flag? You know, I remember, you know, that you're not supposed to walk on the American flag, and here were some that literally were falling out of a basket, and so and they had these stains on them, and I thought that they were beautiful. You know, some of them were 48 state flags, and some of them were 50 state flags. But then I also started to really think about the values that we supposedly stand for, that we were founded on: liberty, equality, and justice for all. And I wanted to revisit those, to reconsider what is equality and what is justice. How do we get to justice? Is justice equal and fair for everyone, or is it a maze? And for some, can they even get through it? And so I made a series of quilts using these remnants of these flags that I collected, that tell a story about American justice.
I think it's also interesting to think about the American flag as it is, and the interesting similarity that the stripes can hold to bars or kind of a cage, and how that relates to this notion of what freedom or justice may be and for whom, which I think is brought out very clearly in this piece. I also want to mention talk a little bit about the relationship to other kinds of abstract painting that you often refer to in other works in the show that you'll see, or art historical sources. And I was curious because when from afar you could read this piece without being able to see the texture, the history, the stories that are held in the fabric itself, or even the materiality of the fabric, and it becomes kind of another image as you see it in different ways. And if that was resonant in the ways that you've used sort of these art historical references.
Yeah, but I'm curious for you as a curator who kind of encountered all this work and had the responsibility of interpreting and juxtaposing and presenting it, like what that meant for you.
Sure. You know, I don't think it's necessary that you have knowledge of those art historical references, but I do think it adds another layer of interpretive value, so to speak. And when you think about, especially an abstract painting or a minimalist object that was intended to kind of, or ostensibly remove a sense of meaning and history from the object and the material, and then to reinsert it in such a poignant way, for me is a very significant approach to take. Whether it's by, in both cases that I'm thinking of off the bat, by using another kind of material that is already embedded with reference, symbolism, as well as its literal history of life in its materiality. Another piece in the show that speaks directly to a Brancusi piece called Endless Column, I believe that one is called, as is the piece in the show, but it's created out of painted basketballs, essentially. So they're, I wouldn't say chrome, but kind of iridescent surface.
Chameleon.
So, sorry?
Chameleon.
Chameleon, yes. Whereby they take on the shape or feeling of a cast sculpture. As you get closer, you can read that they are basketballs, but also as you move around them, they fluctuate in terms of their surface and how you're seeing them. They go from blue to red to kind of purple as you move around them. So again, this kind of troubling of a single view or perspective on the piece. But what also struck me is that this idea of the suggestion of the column being endless, right? That it goes on forever. The aspiration or the movement upwards is intended to be to infinity, and how that is both impossible but also inspiring, or was intended to be, and what that means to then use those objects, the basketballs, in that with that suggestion or parallel to that idea, and how that might resonate differently for the Black community, for where that there has been much discussion around how that was provided as a singular avenue towards achieving one's goals in both positive ways in certain ways, but also very limiting and sort of negative directions as well, which I think the Hammond's piece that also speaks to references quite a bit. Yeah, higher goals, I think. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I don't want to leave absolutely no moments for questions, although technically we're at 3:30. So I understand all of you who need to go if you were planning your afternoon, but I also do want to give a chance to ask at least a few if folks have burning questions of these works or anything you've seen in the show. I mean, I think that's a really significant notation on your part, and to my mind, a very important part of Hank's approach, that it is not just speaking to the language that you recognize, but also helping you understand that you do recognize it, that is a part of your visual culture, and that it may mean something beyond the way that you're already interpreting it, or it may have other interpretations that you're not necessarily aware of. So it's both access by its familiarity, but then also an invitation to think about it in a different way. So yes, to your point, I think that's a crucial element to how one experiences almost all of Hank's work. Back there.
Got a microphone here for. Hi, Hank. Thank you so much for being here. I teach you amongst 4 other photographers in a visual literacy class.
Who are?
What's that?
Who are the other?
Carrie Mayleens, Nan Golden, Veronica Dykstra, and Vernon Hillock Becker, as sort of a survey of many different approaches to photography. And I teach you specifically in the full quarter, but specifically on the interplay between text and imagery. How you use titling to add a new layer of meaning to the visual. And my question is actually really practical. Like, how does text or words, how does that fit into just your practice in general? Do you write a lot? Like, how do you, as you're shifting especially more into text-based work, what is that shift about, and how do you do it?
Well, my mom writes a lot. She's an incredible writer. I am self-diagnosed dyslexic in my 40s. And that kind of has probably led me to really consider why I'm interested in kind of consumable content in some ways with my work, where I'm like, because sometimes I can see around I don't think or see things in a linear way, so I can find kind of disparate things and create connections. So that's where I think both my self-diagnosed ADHD, thanks Mom, also kind of became a superpower, because I think I was always imbued with a sense of self-worth and belief and value, and also a denial of like objective challenges I had. And so I had to be creative. And that kind of allowed me to kind of find new ways to kind of draw connections or tell stories in ways that others weren't necessarily used to. One of the things I struggle with a lot now with TikTok and with Instagram is that my work, which I think is really ready to be memed, is it a disservice to kind of make the same work as accessible to a broader audience through social media when that is also it's a what do you call it when it's like fleeting? It's a fleeting medium. And also, in order to participate in it fully, I have to give all of my thoughts and all of my ideas to a corporation that may or may not have good intention, or maybe not even know what their intentions are. And that's when I think going back to institutions, especially institutions like this that are closer to a younger generation, and presenting the work is a really great opportunity, because people do get to teach it, they get to write about it, they get to experience it, and they're not doing it while also being told to buy this or to look this way or to drink this or to go this place. And so there's something to be said about spaces that are still preserved for our thoughts to be exploratory, or in our bodies to kind of navigate things. So I would say that it's more than just the choice of words. It's, to me, about being able to still speak to audiences, some that are going to be able to be deeper and to do certain research, and some that are only going to be able to see it for a second, but might have it with them for quite some time. So love over rules, or love rules, being something that I think this is the first time that something's been mounted on the exterior of the building in this way, is a really powerful thing for me to be able to participate in reimagining how space on the campus can be used and how art and text can be considered. Yeah, that's a good question. Because as I mentioned, I believe I have ADHD. And so sometimes when a lot of my friends who are great artists, they can take an idea and they can just iterate off of that idea for like ever. Whereas I'm like, okay, that was done. Let me try something else. Let me try something else. Let me do something else. I also think I got that from my mom, who's also kind of like always coming up with a new idea, always doing something new, challenging herself. And what I give my parents credit for is that they were what I say the first generation of African Americans who really got what I'd say a crack at freedom, that they were able to create their own paths. They were able to choose, even though society didn't believe in them or support them, they were able to choose their own destiny. And that to me kind of was a really that's liberty, right? So I think I studied photography, but I also realized that I didn't need to be limited by it. And that led me to make sculpture, to make prints, to make text work, to make films. And now I just literally think about the idea and allow the medium to come as a way to whatever medium is going to be most effective for getting my message across.
tentative hand here. There we go.
Your body of work encompasses so many mediums, and I'm wondering how do you approach that? Do you have help and assistance in creating so many pieces?
Yeah, it depends on what it is. But yeah, I learned a lot from Ryan kind of challenging me to showing that like I can't do it better than him. So depending on the work, am I the best sewer? No. So I met a seamstress through the fabric workshop in museum, and she didn't really know about quilting, but she learned to quilt in working with me. And so each project, oftentimes I'll find somebody who may know how the lenticular printing company in England that I've made a lot, not all of my prints with. I remember I called one company, and I told them what I wanted to do, and they were like, not only can I not do that, I won't do that. And they just hung up on the phone. They hung up the phone because a lot of it was like, I'm trying to, like, yeah, I know you do things this way. Let's do it the opposite way, which is what art making is. And I like to use industrial materials to do things that they're not normally meant to do. So the piece out front, it's a flag frame, the one with the Trouble the Water. So there's a carpenter that I met who could do these really fine, like, and he was making tables when I met him, but I was like, can you take these flag frames that I ordered and make them in this design? And so it wasn't ever, it just kind of became organic, and it was, I wish once I had a good one, I just kept doing it and maybe even learned, but I think because I didn't necessarily learn all of these tools, I wasn't so attached to it in a way that kind of allowed me to apply different things to them.
Well, thank you all so very much for coming. And thank you, Hank, for all of your time and thoughtfulness. And